Hey everybody, what's going on? Hexlex here. Got another Master Duel video for y'all. So today we're coming back to Mathmech once again. I figured it's been like pretty much nothing but ISHIZU and SPRIGHT variants for quite a while now. So I was like, okay, what's a deck I want to play that doesn't have either of those like archetypes or engines in them? Mathmech, cool, that's a good one. I'm always down for a little bit of Mathmech. This deck is actually, you know, I've said this before and I'll say it again, still very strong in this meta. Absolutely still a very solid tier 2 contender. It might not seem like that because this deck has all but disappeared on regular ranked and Duelist Cup ladders, but that doesn't mean the deck is, like I said, dropped significantly in power level by any means. This deck is still extremely good. And like I said, at the very least tier 2, I mean, it's not tier 1, so, but I would say it's like mid tier 2, if not upper tier 2 still. It turns out Superfactorial is still an extremely powerful card, and is a lot easier to resolve in this meta. Well, you know what? I was going to say because people weren't playing Ghost Spell, but there is the ISHIZU Shufflers. That does actually make this card significantly more difficult to resolve in this meta. Or at least, you know, to be fair, is it really any more or less difficult than when Superfactorial was like the big card to counter and everyone's second Ghost Spell? The fact that, like, there does exist a natural counter for this card is going to be a lot more relevant once Bystials hit, because Bystials, I think, are going to be even more widespread as an engine than ISHIZUs are, and a lot easier to trigger. It's not like if they just happen to have a Miller engrave. It's like if they just have a Bystial in hand, which is obviously a lot easier to do than putting either Keldo or Mudora in the graveyard. So definitely getting some Mathmech kicks in while I can before Bystials come out. Though, to be fair, I think we have a decent bit of time, at least a couple of months before that deck drops. So you might notice that this build is actually the same that I featured last time. It's really not for a lack of not wanting to update it. I just looked it over and I was like, you know, this build is honestly still totally fine for this meta, I think. I do still really like the triple tactics talent. I think it's very, very good in pretty much any deck that can support it. That mainly being 40 card decks that have relatively large amount of room for tech. And Mathmech definitely fits that bill. We're also still playing Valor and Nibiru. Even though Valor, I think is honestly kind of mid in this meta, we're still playing the two of them to go in line with our small world because, as I've said before, I really like this particular monster lineup, especially the Valor, Nibiru, and Gatchiri ad Ignister, because if you have all three of these monsters in your deck, then all these other monsters in the deck are searchable off of Small World. Particularly Circular, that's the main one that's going to be most important to have to be searchable off of Small World all the time. You want to make sure that we're not bricking up with Small World getting to Circular pretty much ever. And there does exist stuff like Link Infraflyer, but there's really no reason to ever play Link Infraflyer over Gatchiri ad Ignister. They both literally do the same thing in that they special summon themselves if you have a Cyberse. Gatchiri has to negate the Cyberse monster, but that's not often super relevant. You could just use like a Circular or just a Sigma whose effect, just a monster whose effect you've already used. But you can go ahead and use that and special summon the Gatchiri. It's a better body on board than Link Infraflyer. It's got 3000 defense, it protects 3 Cyberse monsters, and of course, if you use it as Link material, that monster then becomes immune. So a lot of reasons why we would definitely want Gatchiri over Link Infraflyer. Like I said, I don't think there's any reason to pretty much ever use Link Infraflyer. I don't think very highly of it in Mathmech, honestly. But yeah, not only is the main deck exactly the same as it was before, so is the extra deck. There is actually a couple of things I was thinking about updating, potentially. I could see this extra deck using Nightmare Unicorn and or a Goddess in this meta. Both are really good removal options with IP Masquerena, and your end boards will allow you to go into either. The thing is, though, and this is always the case with extra deck slots, the flex spot in this extra deck is absolutely the second Laplacian, and I'm still convinced that the second Laplacian is absolutely the best card for that slot. I don't think we actually do in any of the games we'll show coming up here, but it's relatively easy to make a Laplacian on turn 1, and then also still be able to make one on your opponent's turn 1, ripping 2 cards out of their hand, and then also a card on the field during your opponent's turn more than likely, as well as setting up a negate with a Diameter for your opponent's turn as well there. So I think any deck that can hand rip on turn 1 probably should be, if it doesn't have to go too far out of the way to do it. The Braver package is really strong right now for that exact reason, so my thought process has always been, like, why would you not want to do it in Mathmech? And I think it does continue to be the best choice for this flex spot in the extra deck. Really, there's not a whole lot of other flex spots here. You could argue that maybe Avermax or Apollusa, one of those two, is a flex spot, but I'd still rather have both of those than Nightmare Unicorn. I think Apollusa, even this meta, is still better to go into with your IP. In this deck specifically, it's better than Nightmare Unicorn to go into. So, yeah, there's not a whole lot to say about the deck here, mostly because, like I said, it hasn't changed. But just because it hasn't changed and just because there are other very strong decks out there doesn't mean that this deck has fallen by any regards. It's only fallen in representation because, like, especially in a game with a best of one ladder where the card pool is a lot more accessible than it is in paper like TCG, people will tend to switch decks a lot more frequently. I mean, I'm very much a strong case example of that. I very much shift towards the newest meta deck. Now, granted, I often do that to keep the channel fresh and making sure we're covering the whole meta, but it's also something I like to do anyway. I won't pretend like it's not. Alright, so that's pretty much everything I've got to say about the build. Let's break it down card by card and then look at some games. We're on 1 Effect Failure, 3 Maxx, 3 Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, 2 Mathmech Sigma, 3 Mathmech Addition, 3 Mathmech Subtraction, 3 Mathmech Diameter, 3 Mathmech Circular, 1 Gatchiri Addition, 1 Nibiru the Primal Being, 3 Cynet Mining, 1 Mathmech Equation, 3 Triple Tactics Talent, 3 Small World, 2 Call by the Grave, 1 Crossout Designator, 3 Infinite Impermanence, and then 1 Mathmech Superfactorial to round out the main deck. Now for the extra deck, we're on 2 Primathmech Laplacian, 2 Primathmech Alembertain, 1 Link Disciple, 1 Link Devotee, 1 Linguriboh, 1 Cyberse Wicckid, 1 Update Jammer, 1 IP Masquerena, 1 Splash Mage, 1 Transcode Talker, 1 Mech Knight Crusadia Avermax, 1 Apollusa Bow of the Goddess, and finally 1 Accesscode Talker. There's our build. Let's look at some gameplay. Okay, first duel, we're going to be up against 60 card ISHIZU Shaddoll. It is very much a focused, Shaddoll package. I said oops because I thought I bumped the desk there. I don't think I actually did. Oh, whatever. We're going to be taking the second turn, and thankfully we opened the bug, so we're just going to fire that off during our opponent's draw phase. They actually chained with an El Shaddoll fusion in response, so I was a little worried here they're going to end up getting out a Winda anyway, but they end up fusing Agido and Windy, so they can't go for Winda because there's not a dark monster in there. They're going to go for the... Oh my god. What is this? How do you pronounce this again? Shekanaga, I think? I actually did play when this card came out, so I actually do remember this one. This does have the quick effect to negate one of our special summoned monsters' effects and destroy it, so we will have to be mindful of that going into our opponent's turn, but if that's the worst they do, I'm totally cool with that, and if they try to do worse, we can hopefully draw enough stuff with Maxx to out that. So the Windy is going to set a Squamata onto the board. Oops, sorry, I thought I paused it there. They ended up milling a Hedgehog. They also milled a Schism, that's worth noting. If they end up sending a fusion monster to grave, they get this back. We milled actually a Sigma. We actually milled Sigma, Diameter, and Circular, funnily enough. There's like the 3 you want to get back with Factorial. So it's actually not bad to start with all 3 of those in your graveyard at the beginning of the turn, especially given that we have 2 Diameter in our hand here. We also have Small World and Cynet Mining, of course. But it's not going to be summoning too much more, though. They're just going to end up passing back to us after adding, what was that, a Squamata with the Hedgehog? Yeah, Squamata. Here I'm going to use the Small World. I actually should have used this to grab an Ash Blossom. That would have been the better call in case they end up having a Maxx here. And I could have just used the Cynet Mining to pitch an extra Diameter for Circular. So there was a minor misplay on my part, but they end up not having it, so it's not going to super duper matter here. They do have the Shekanaga, and they're going to use it on my Circular to negate and destroy that. They then get to also use their Squamata's effect to send a Shaddoll from deck to grave. Looks like that's going to be Aerial to banish some stuff out of my graveyard. It's fine, though. I literally don't need any of that in my graveyard to end the duel here, because we did still have that extra Circular engrave. Gonna bring that back with Diameter, and then go for the Splash Mage. At this point, I'm just going to go for a pretty routine kill here. Using Splash Mage to bring back the Diameter, I then use that with the Sigma in order to make Update Jammer. This is the classic turn 2 OTK play with the Mathmech. So we're going to use Update Jammer and Splash Mage to go into Accesscode. The Update Jammer would allow the Accesscode to attack twice. It'd be at 4,300 attack points. Accesscode can banish Splash Mage, and the Update Jammer to blow up our opponent's board. We then swing twice with the 4300, thanks to Update Jammer, and go in for lethal. That's what would have continued to have happened there had our opponent not conceded, but they recognized that that was just going to happen, and thus just ended up conceding right then and there. Pretty routine going second game, but we still have some other duels to take a look at. Let's see what a pretty routine going first duel for this deck goes like. Here we find ourselves against Sword Soul Tenyi, and like I said, this is going to be, I believe if I recall correctly, a duel where we end up going first. Yep, here we are. So now I'm going to show you what a pretty typical Mathmech going first turn looks like here. We only have Circular in our hand, but that's all we need to combo off. In fact, this opening hand is looking fantastic. If we had had another extender, like pretty much any other extender, it could be Diameter, it could be the Equation if we had opened that, it could be Addition or Subtraction. If we had opened any of those 4 cards alongside the Circular here, we actually could have hand-ripped our opponent on the first turn here, summoning a Laplacian and still having the ability to Superfactorial for a Laplacian on our opponent's turn as well, but this is still fine. You'll note that I added the Equation and not the Superfactorial off of Circular. That might look a little bit weird, but we do want to do it this way specifically in order to make sure that we don't send the Sigma to the graveyard. We don't want to use this as a Link material. I want to use it as an ISHIZU material so that it ends up in the graveyard. But by going into Link Disciple and Link Devotee, using Circular and then Equation, bringing back Circular to use it again, we can go into Cyberse Wicckid and then Linguriboh. Wicckid will then be able to banish Disciple to add a Diameter that we can normal summon and activate to fetch our Circular back from the grave. Then we're going to link specifically, or not link, overlay specifically the Sigma and the Diameter into Alembertain. We'll then use Alembertain's effect, protected by a Diameter, to search up our Superfactorial, and that's how we're going to end up adding it to hand. You can see that also very nicely puts the Circular, Sigma, and Diameter in our graveyard, and also sets up the Linguriboh and IP Cyberse Wicckid on our field. We also get to set the Imperm and the Callby along with the Superfactorial. We have a Maxx for their turn, and we also have a Triple Tactics talent for our next turn if they have any disruption for us that they didn't have on turn 1. So, gonna fire off Maxx during the draw phase to play around any opposing Triple Tactics talent. My opponent activates the Imperm on the IP Masquerena here, which is definitely interesting. I thought maybe they were trying to bait out my Linguriboh, but I'm just going to chain the IP Masquerena effect instead. Because really, using IP to go into Apollusa the first time I had priority passed to me was what I was trying to do anyway. So, yeah, this is why my opponent wasting their Imperm. Had they actually made another play and passed priority to me, I probably would have activated IP anyway, then gone into Apollusa. Then they could have potentially tried to use the Imperm on the Apollusa, but that's also why I like to leave the Linguriboh and only use IP and Cyberse Wicckid. You only get a 2-material Apollusa, but you still have the Linguriboh alongside it, and then if your opponent tries to Imperm the Apollusa, you can use Linguriboh on the Imperm. But here, where they're straight up activating it on the IP, I'll just chain IP's effect. Now my opponent's going to fire off Maxx in response, which would normally be, like, honestly, not devastating, but it would normally force me to chain my Superfactorial here in order to deny my opponent 2 draws off of Maxx, and I would much rather wait until my opponent has a monster on board for me to remove before I chain the Superfactorial. But thankfully we open Callby, so I get to just use that on Maxx here and not have to worry about activating Superfactorial now. So like I said, Callby is going to banish that Maxx and then negate it, so we don't have to worry about that. And then we'll just chain the IP Masquerena, then Imperm's target will no longer be on the board, and it will effectively fizzle. So our opponent basically used the Imperm for no effect here, and then we just traded the Callby for 1 card in their hand, the Maxx. So when my opponent summons the Tenyi Spirit Vishuddha, that is when I will activate Superfactorial, as I can now not only get rid of a card from their hand, but also this Vishuddha on the field. I definitely don't want them to go into Monk of the Tenyi using the Vishuddha, because then they get to use Vishuddha to bounce one of my monsters. Which I could just use Apollusa to negate, but I might as well save the Apollusa negation. Hitting the Sword Soul Emergence in their hand is really, really good. They're going to try to summon Moye. They do reveal another Emergence in hand, so they do have that, but that actually can't get anything meaningful here, because They can only really search up Taya or Longyan. They've already normal summoned, so they can't normal summon Taya, and they don't have another Tenyi or Worm card to reveal for Longyan. Here I'm absolutely just going to negate this Moye with the Apollusa. Now, to be fair, my opponent does get to battle here. They get to battle over my Apollusa with the Moye. And right now I only have Laplacian and Linguriboh. So I would like another, really any other monster would do it here with Small World, but we just straight up drew the Circular anyway, because I guess I'm just the luckiest player. But again, because of the way that our deck is set up, it literally does not matter what monster I top decked here. As long as I top decked a monster, Small World would have led to Circular. But if we just top deck Circular, that's also fine. Gonna activate Circular, sending the Sigma. At this rate, I have more than enough materials. I'm just gonna go straight into the Update Jammer though. Straight into Update Jammer, and I'll just use that alongside the Linguriboh and the Laplacian to go straight into our access code. Because I know my opponent's last card in hand is Emergence, and I know they can't stop us, I also know that nothing in their graveyard is capable of stopping us. We can just take the most direct route there. Here's that access code line for the OTK. As you can see with the Update Jammer, it can attack twice, using access code to blow up our opponent's board. We'll smack him for 4,300 once, and then another time, and that's all she wrote for Mr. Adler here. So there's that duel. We do still have a couple more to watch though, so let's go ahead straight into our next one. Alright, our next opponent here is going to be on Live Twin Sprite. Looks like it is the Scythe-Lock variant. I don't think they had Iblay. I didn't see it at a glance, but I definitely did see the Scythe there. We're going to be taking the first turn again this time around. And our opening hand is looking fairly solid. Now here I actually did make another minor misplay when using Small World. I actually should have activated Cynet Mining and just discarded the Small World. The reason, well, okay, it's you can actually argue whether or not it was a misplay. Here's the reason I chose Small World. Ideally, had I known the Cynet Mining would resolve, yes, I would use Cynet Mining, discard Small World, keep the Maxx in my hand. However, in a world where our opponent has Ash Blossom, and in a world where I don't know whether or not they have Ash Blossom, I decided to use Small World first, because if our opponent does Ash it, then we're not committed by discarding the material. We can still use Cynet Mining, discarding either Maxi or Imperm, probably just Imperm, to go ahead and search up the Mathmech Circular there. Funnily enough, this play is actually at its worst in the world where our opponent does not have Ash Blossom to stop us, and then we're just left with Cynet Mining and Circular when we could have had Maxi and Circular. But again, in a world where I didn't know how my opponent was going to respond, I do think this was the optimal line here. From here on out, it's going to be another pretty standard turn 1 play with just Circular, sending the Sigma, using Circular's effect to grab Equation. And again, even if I didn't have Superfactorial in my hand already, I would grab Equation here anyway, because we're going to want to use Circular to make Disciple, and then bring it back to make the Devotee again. And again, if you're wondering why I don't just use Sigma, it's because I don't want it to get banished. If it goes from the field to the graveyard, it'll just get banished. But if I use it as an Xyz material for Alembertain, then it will go to the graveyard. Once again, we're going to use the Devotee, or sorry, not the Devotee, the Disciple, and the Devotee's token, using those to go into Cyberse Wicckid. We can then use the remaining Link token to make the Linguriboh, specifically under the Cyberse Wicckid. That way we get the Cyberse Wicckid search, and we get to add, we're going to add a Diameter here, in order to be able to summon that and get back the Circular, then overlaying Diameter and Sigma exactly to not only have a negate up for this search, but also, again, get that Sigma in the graveyard. Alembertain would normally be grabbing the Superfactorial here, as we saw in the last game, but because we already have Superfactorial, I just get to search a Circular for our turn 3 to ensure we end up with the kill anyway. Now we go into IP Masquerena, set Imperm and Superfactorial, and then pass back to our opponent here. Though it's going to start with the Live Twin Sunny Snitch, I will definitely let that resolve. However, after it's resolved, I'm going to immediately use my IP Masquerena's effect. That way, I have this Apollusa on the board before the Leela is summoned, because I definitely want to negate that effect. Opponent activates their Leela. I'm going to chain the Apollusa, and the opponent chains Ghost Ogre. Now, normally this would be enough to stop my Apollusa, because Apollusa has to reduce the attack in order to negate the activation. It's an and if you do effect. And Ghost Ogre, obviously, will destroy Apollusa. It's much like Ghost Ogre destroying the gigantic sprite. I end up chaining my Imperm here to negate the Leela anyway. However, I didn't remember in the moment that I actually didn't need to do this because my opponent missed this as well. But I actually used IP Masquerena to make this Apollusa, which means it can't be destroyed by card effects. So the Ghost Ogre, even if it would have resolved, or even, you know, when it resolves, rather, does not do anything to the Apollusa because it can't be destroyed by card effects, and Apollusa would have resolved negating Leela anyway. So basically, I use my Imperm for no real reason here, but it's not going to be the end of the world. Now, my opponent using the Galaxy Cyclone to quote-unquote force the Superfactorial, that's actually 100% fine because my plan was to activate Superfactorial at the resolution of this chain link anyway. I want to get my opponent's level 2 monster off the board, the Leela, so that way they can't special summon any potential sprite monsters they may have in hand. Chain link resolves, again, didn't need to use this Imperm, but yeah, because the Apollusa would have negated the Leela anyway. Now I'll use the Laplacian's effect. I am going to send 3 materials to make them discard. They end up sending their Jet. I'll send the Leela and the Sunny Snitch as well, and the opponent just concedes at that point. They know I have a Circular in hand, so they know there's literally no way I can't win, like not win during the next turn. So there's that duel. We have one more to take a look at. Let's go ahead and jump straight into it. And our final game is going to be against Altergeist. Definitely been a minute since I've seen Altergeist. Been a minute since I've played them too. I actually, confession, this is one of the few times I've actually dismantled a deck, but I wasn't actually nearly as into Altergeist as I thought. Even when Multifigure went to 2, I was like, I don't want to craft a second one, so I actually dismantled my Multifigure. And the whatever the ultra rare Altergeist Link 4 is, so no more Altergeist for the time being, but it's not a deck I was particularly interested in anyway. So opponent's going to go first, setting 3 back row before passing back to us, because they didn't have like the best hand in the world. They do have a Maxx, but thankfully we've got the call by for that. Even if they resolve this Maxx, we'll still play through it anyway, and they are actually going to resolve it, because they got a Solemn Judgment for our called by here. This is totally fine with me, because I'm just going to end the duel on this turn anyway, and actually, the Solemn Judgment makes it a lot easier for me. Now I don't have to bother going into Update Jammer, I can just go into as direct of a line into Accesscode as possible. Now the funny thing here, and I actually wish I would have gotten to play this game live to show this, but when I summoned the Circular, right, there was a, or rather, when I'm activating my effects here, especially the effects that trigger on summons, there is a pause where priority passes to my opponent, then it asks me if I want to activate the effect. And this is actually very telling, because it's specifically happening in response to effects that activate on summon. I know it's a Solemn Judgment, I know it's another counter trap, because even if it was Imperm, the effect would activate first, and then the opponent would get priority to negate it with the Imperm as a chained response. But the fact that my opponent's getting priority just directly in response tells me they have another Solemn Judgment. So I can kind of plan accordingly. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to start by going into Linguriboh, just in case that last back row ends up being relevant and not Solemn Judgment. Now I'm going to go into Diameter and use that to go into the Alembertain. The Alembertain has a Diameter negate. Now that can't stop Solemn Judgment. Indeed, I can't stop Solemn Judgment at all here, really, because it's a counter trap. But I'm going to use the Gatchiri Designator as part of my little ploy here. Basically, the idea is that if my opponent does use another Solemn Judgment, they're just going to drop down to 2,000 life points. And they actually do end up using, I thought it was in response to this Splash Mage summon. No, it's actually in response to the Accesscode summon. That they're going to flip up Solemn Judgment and just straight up negate it. But that puts them down below 2,000 life points, which is enough for my Alembertain to kill them. Not only does Alembertain have its own negate, because I used Diameter to summon it, but Gatchiri Designator does not have to be used on the card you Link summoned. It's actually just whenever it's sent to the graveyard, period. So I'm going to target my Alembertain. Now it doesn't matter what my opponent has in hand or what their back row is. My Alembertain is completely unaffected by card effects. It also has a negate in case my opponent tries to chain an effect that would like summon a monster to their board, and they're left themselves with exactly 2,000 life points left. That will be enough for me to launch this direct attack and finish out our duel. And there you have it. There's our last game there. A fairly quick one, but it's kind of funny how despite our opponent having multiple Solemn Judgments, we were still able to kind of take advantage of that position and put our opponent into a place where we're able to OTK them all the same. Like I said, I was never not going to win during that turn. So there are those games. Hopefully you enjoyed those. That's all the time I've got for today, though. So let's move now to our outro. Alright everybody, thank you so much for watching all the way to the very end of the video like this. That means a whole lot to me. Not just personally, but it's also a great way of supporting the channel as well. If you're interested in supporting the channel in other means, you can of course feel free to comment and or subscribe right here on YouTube. I'm always looking to the comments section. You guys leave some pretty awesome feedback as far as like constructive criticism goes when it comes to deck building, gameplay, channel content, all that stuff. So feel free to leave your opinion down there. I will be sure to take a look at that there. And then subscribing is going to be the best way to get notifications of when these videos drop. That does happen every day, by the way, so if you're looking for daily Master Duel content, you've come to the right place. And there are more places where you can get some daily Master Duel content. If you check out the description below, follow the top link over to my Patreon page. There for just $5 a month, which is as much as you pay for a booster pack. You'll find a lot more value than a pack full of filler over there. We've got some previews for content upcoming here on the channel. We've got some exclusive games that are only posted over on Patreon over there. We've got some Q&As, and then you can also have your name featured in this lovely credit sequence where I thank all of the people who are helping contribute over there on Patreon. It's a huge support to the channel, and it really means a lot as well. So thank you everyone who is donating that is featured here on screen. And again, you know, it's not just a pure donation, you do get some more daily Master Duel content over there just for being a part of the Patreon. But I think that's about all the time that I have for today's video. Once again, I just want to thank you so very much for sticking all the way to the end of the video. Again, it just means a lot as I do put a decent amount of work into getting these videos out every single day. But that's about all the time that I've got for now. So without further ado, this is XLex. I'm signing out, and I hope you have a fantastic day.